Well, where are we in our quest to produce software? Well, we've started out back in the day talking about users and user stories that they created, and we thought that was great news. It turns out that user stories are written in the language of the user. We figured that one out. But that means there's sort of high-level stuff. So if we take a look at a user story and we say, well, listen, I've got software developers who actually have to implement this. By the way, in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, there's a power switch on and off. Do me a favor, go ahead and touch that now. Turn that screen off. Make it cold, dark, and empty. Thank you very much. So you can take those user stories that are at a high level, and you can actually break them up into what we were calling tasks. And tasks are sort of halfway between a user story and code, but a little bit closer, a little bit more related to what the software developers are actually going to have to do. Once you have your task, your software developers can take a look at it, and they can come up with estimates. We like estimates. You can show the task and you can show the user stories to your customers. And you can say, listen, you've got a whole bunch of things you want me to do. Let's go ahead and put some priorities on this. You know, what's more important, what's less important. So you get the customer to actually do some sorting on that stuff. Now you've got a list of a bunch of stuff that somebody wants you to do, which is great, but you have to figure out when you're going to do it. So we came up with the concept of iterations, and iterations are how long, roughly? Right, so it's 20 working days, it's probably about a month's worth of effort and stuff like that. Great, so every month we're going to do an iteration. We think that's actually pretty good stuff. And we did a beautiful job of laying all of our tasks and user stories out into iterations. And then we sort of stepped back and said, well, that looks great, but it turns out it's not really going to match up with reality because we had forgotten about the fact that the people who are working on the software development project are human beings. And human beings, although they're fabulous, wonderful creatures, are generally not 100% productive. So we said, wow, we got to come up with a way to work a little bit of a dose of reality into this, and so we invented the concept of velocity. The velocity says, really, how productive is your team? We came up with sort of a rule of thumb for velocity. We said 0.7, which means that they're going to be about 70% productive, which means out of every 10 days, there's going to be about 3 days that those folks are going to be doing something else, and that can be pretty much anything. But so we'll get about 70% productivity out of them, was our initial guess. That's fantastic. So we went through and we did one of those iterations, or maybe we did 2 or 3 or 4 iterations, no matter what. We finished them up. We spent a little bit of time talking about what we're going to do when we finish up an iteration. Okay, so we're done. We're celebrating. We have a party. We record some of the stuff that went on. We do some calculations to figure out what we need for the next time. And now we're talking about getting ready for the next iteration. So we've got another iteration coming up. We're going to do more code, but if we want to do it right, we got to plan. We've got to make sure that we got our ducks in a row. We know what we want to do. We want to know how we're going to do it. So remember, if you go back to the day, we had all of our user stories here. You remember all these from back in the day. So pay with MasterCard and Visa, show current deals, book packages, arrange travel, book a room, book a boat tour, order DVDs, review stay, order room service, choose a view, and I think there was one more. Yes, that's what it was. 3,000 concurrent users. If I recall correctly, pay with MasterCard and Visa and support 3,000 concurrent users were the 2 things that we did right off the bat. The reason we did it was because, although it doesn't show here, I think they both had a high priority. Remember, we also have estimates assigned to most of these. Interesting, not on that one. On most of these, we have an estimate assigned to it. Priorities, 10 was the highest and 50 was the lowest. So we had sort of a priority system set up here. So we had something sort of squared away. But this is how things stood at the beginning of the last iteration. Now, we got that iteration done. Now we're standing here. So as we like to say, time's passed. And over time, all sorts of interesting things can change. And one of the most significant things that's changed is you've actually gone to your customer and you've actually presented your customer with working software. They've seen it, they've used it, and perhaps they're using it on a daily basis. When customers see software, something magical happens in their head. All of a sudden, what they've been talking about has suddenly become real. And when it becomes real, all of a sudden their priorities change, and of course, that magical of all things, they think of new things for you to do. Now that I see it, here's what I really want you to do. So we should expect some changes to occur. You'll recall this. This was our iterations. Remember, pay with MasterCard and Visa. We had planned on the second one to do book a room and book packages. And on the third one, oops, I think we only had 2 there. Choose a view and review stay. Remember, we're adding this up. So 10 and 15 is 25 days. Down here it's 15 and 10. It comes out to be 25 days. Remember, our iterations are probably about a month long, so that's 30 days. 25, quite obviously, is less than 30, but that's okay. Because by the time we hit iteration number 2, hopefully the testers are working on iteration number 1. And we expect the testers to find what? Bugs, okay? So that magical 5 days, which may or may not exist at the end of that iteration, could certainly be used to do refactoring. Remember, that's where we're fixing code that doesn't really need to be fixed, we're just making it better. Or to actually fix bugs that the kids who are testing this version have reported to us here. So we've got 5 days in both of these, a little bit of float, a little bit of extra something. You can handle anything that happens. So this isn't too bad, okay? But now we want to go ahead and plan our next iteration. We've got a bunch of user stories here. What do we got? We've got at least 3 here. Book a room, book a package, Visa payment bug fix. Oops, we don't know about that one, did we? So apparently when you implemented your Visa payment code, you screwed up. But it's not that big of a screw up because there's just like, what, 2 hours or 2 days or something like that worth of effort there. When we're figuring out what's going to go into the next iteration, we're going to have to drop in these stories that are just a low priority. Remember, we've gone back to the customer. We've said, hey, look, here's the list of all the stories that you told us about, and here's the priority that you gave us at the start of the last iteration. Is this priority still valid? And the answer, of course, will always be no. Something's changed in my life, something's changed in the market, something's changed based on using the software. Let's reprioritize those. That means that some of the stories that might have been there went to the bottom, and if they're on the bottom, you drop them off for now. Okay, you want to schedule the story, obviously, with the highest priority. Highest priority wins. Now, if you got a whole bunch of stories that are highest priority, you're really going to have a discussion with the customer and say, listen, they're all #1 priority. They can't be. Let's reprioritize all the #1 priority stories. And then, of course, include any bug fixes. Now, remember, especially any bug fixes the customer has requested. If a customer reports a bug, it means they're seeing something as they use the software that's probably going to annoy them. So the quicker, sooner, faster that we can fix any bug fixes that they reported, the better our life or their life will be. Okay, velocity, we've talked about this and we've talked about it. So remember, velocity is part of planning the next iteration, right? When we put together the iteration, we want to be as accurate as we possibly can. Look, we're dealing with estimates and guesses and plans. Okay? This stuff is not built on concrete by any stretch of the imagination. We are guessing. We're guessing at how long it's going to take to do stuff. We're guessing at how efficient our developers are going to be. We're guessing when we're going to be able to deliver these features. Great, wonderful, fabulous, but it's all a guess. So velocity gives us a chance or a little tool to make sure that our guesses are a little bit better than just completely pulled out of the air. When we calculate the velocity, we need to figure out, take a look back at how things were done and say, hey, what happened in the last iteration? Anything that was put off, we don't really care about because it didn't happen. We want to know what was actually done, and we want to know how long it took to do it. Because ultimately, those are the 2 inputs that we're going to use to calculate the velocity that relate to the next iteration that we're getting ready to do. Remember, velocity is going to give you a reasonably accurate prediction of what you can actually get done in the next iteration. By calculating velocity, you take into account reality. And that's the key. Otherwise, you're just making stuff up, pulling it out of there, and you can put anything down. Use a little bit of velocity, and you get a little bit closer to what you're really, truly going to be able to do. Beware of the customer. Yeah, so we, as quasi-technical people, we love numbers. We love looking at the past and saying, the numbers tell me this, and this shows me what I can do going forward, and you're 100% correct on that. But the thing that's going to screw you up each and every single time is going to be your customer. And remember, you're working for the customer, and I'm sorry, who's paying you? The customer, so who's always right? If it wasn't for that, the world would be a perfect place, right? So once you have everything planned for your next iteration, you do need to get your customer's approval. This is what I'm planning on doing. I've listened to you, I've heard you, I've reprioritized based on what you said. This is what I'm planning on doing. And you show it to them and they go, no. But you said this, right? So you have to get their buy-in. You have to get their approval before you start working. Okay? Your customer literally can change everything. And by the way, when they do that, you can start to throw away stuff. Your estimates from planning poker, your user stories, your software development dashboard. Throw away, throw away, throw away because your customer changed their mind. You will be a small pile of tears. You'll be on the floor to make a curled up pattern. You'll be kicking yourself in a circle, but it doesn't matter because the customer gets to do whatever they want to do, right? Here's the thing though, software is all about change. If you weren't open to change in your life, you would not be here. Instead, you would be taking an accounting class right now. The rules for accounting were worked out about 2,000 years ago, and they really haven't changed over 2,000 years. You, oddly enough, have expressed an interest in software and software development, and guess what? Software is all about change. Alright? So lots of things can change on you. Your customer can change their mind in a big way. You can have programmers either join your team or leave your team. That happens quite frequently. And of course, your company can lay off an entire department just because they were having a bad day. Plus, a zillion other things could happen. The good news out of all of this is that, look, what you're planning has changed, but how you plan it has not changed at all. Okay? You know that you need a new velocity. You need to figure out the number of days of development that you have, which is based on all the estimates that you got. And you now need to go ahead and build user stories, reprioritize, and then of course do that magical replanning thing. Right? So when the customer changes everything on you, yeah, you sort of shrug and go, hey, I saw this coming, and then you knuckle down, do all the work that we've talked about, and poof, you've got a new plan to work off of. And that plan's actually probably reasonably accurate. Change sucks. Okay. So we go back to our iteration example. You know, it doesn't change here, because this is work we've got done. We're good with that. But then we're down here. So we had book room and book packages as part of our second iteration. But you know, there's always a possibility our customer says, you know, the review stay, it turns out it's really important to my business. Right? This is going to bring new people in. So I need this feature earlier than I need this book packages. People are booking individual stays and not actually booking actual packages. So give me this now and give me this later. All right, we can do that, right? We just have to do a little switching there. We've got to do some maybe touch base, make sure that these estimates are still good. Now I've got 10 and 10, which would be 20. In theory, I've got 30 days to do some development, which leaves me 10 days of development time on the tail end here. Sure seems like I could probably go back to my user stories and see if I've got a 10-day user story someplace and maybe stick that additional story into iteration number 2, right? Maybe because of their change, I can get more features packed into iteration 2. That would be pretty cool. All right, change causes 3 things to have to be updated. First off, of course, the user stories. With a little up, every piece of code that you have in your software has a user story associated with it. If you've got something in your code that doesn't have the user story, there's a fundamental question that you need to be asking as to, like, where did that come from? What's it doing there? You know, did I put it there? Did somebody else put it there? Why is it there? Can I remove it? Because every time you have code that's in your code, which is sort of a long way to say it, lines of code that make up part of your code, you have to maintain it, you have to support it, you have to test it. And if it's not part of a user story, it sure seems like you're wasting your time with it. Okay? In this case, customers' ability to post a review of their stay needs to have a user story created for it. Right? So review stay goes up here, you need a user story that explains exactly what that means. Estimates, every user story needs to have an estimate, of course. You can't figure out how long it's going to take if you don't have an estimate. How much time is it going to take to code that function? And here's the one that will trip you up every single time. How much time is it going to take to integrate that function with your other code? So when you drop a new piece of functionality into your code, there it sits. But it's going to do you no good if you don't take the time to hook it in to the code that's already there. Which means there's some goes-ins. In other words, your new code will have input, and it has some goes-outs. It's going to deliver its output or its results to some other part of your code. So getting your code there and getting your code to work correctly is relatively straightforward. Hooking it into the existing code actually can be a real challenge. And making sure that you did that hook in correctly is another big deal. And then, of course, priorities. Customers in charge of assigning priorities to each user's story. And once they've done that, then you have to take their priorities, and then you, workers on you, have to take a look at those priorities and figure out what you're going to be able to cram into the next iteration of code that you're planning on working on. So let's plan our next iteration. So we already talked about dropping the stories, sketching the stories, and including the bug fixes. What do we got? We've got book a room, we got book packages, we got visa payment, bug fix. I think we got one more. What else we got? Oh, review stay. I think that's it. So this is basically a 10, 10, a 2, and a 15. So if we take a look here, oh wait, there we go. We've got the 3,000, oh jeez, 3,000 user feature refactor. So remember, refactor is where we take a look at code that is working correctly, so we're happy and pleased about that. So it's not really a bug report, but we've taken a look at it and we've gone, okay, I understand how it's done. Man, I could do so much of a better job on that. Make it quicker, better, faster, smaller, whatever, and it's probably going to be worth my effort to go ahead and do that. So if we take a look at what we have here, Together, these make up 29 days worth of effort. Hey, you know, if our iteration has 30 days in it, well, that's going to fit. That is fantastic. It does leave us with a little problem here of book packages. So book packages is off the planning calendar for iteration number 2, simply because we don't have the time or the staff to implement. Okay, we can work with that. All right, what else we got going on here? Code from other people. So more often than not, you are going to be dropped into a project and you're going to inherit code that somebody else created. Or you're going to be working on a project and they say, stop, don't code that up because we've already done it on another project. We've already done it on another homework. Let's go ahead and just give you the code to do that. Poof. So they drop it in your lap. This is the best of times and the worst of times, right? So you inherit code from other people, okay? Or you have to interface to other people's code. That's another situation. Trust nobody when it comes to time to code. They may tell you what it does, but until you prove it, you can't really guarantee that that is what it does. Unless you've seen their code running or run tests against them, you have to assume that it does not actually work the way it's being advertised. Your software is your responsibility. If you have a lovely clear glass of water, and somebody shows up with a muddy glass of water, and they pour their muddy glass of water into your clear glass of water, and that's what you give to your customer, the customer's getting a muddy glass of water, right? Same thing with software. You've got great software, somebody shows up with questionable software and adds their questionable software to your software, you will be delivering questionable software to your customer, and you don't want to do that. Okay? So don't assume that other people are following the processes that you've followed, and it doesn't really matter who wrote your code, it's your software, and so therefore, it's your responsibility. Okay, wrap up. So, when you're planning your next iteration, you always have to check with the customer to make sure that this is the work that they want. Truly, there would be nothing sadder than running through an iteration, showing up and giving your customer the next version of the software and having the customer go, you know, that's not what I really wanted, right? A lot of effort, time, and energy went into creating this piece of software, and if it's not what the customer wants, you've got a big problem. You need to recalculate your velocity at the end of every iteration. Your team will change. You will have new people, new things will be going on. People hopefully get smarter, quicker, better, faster. So as you start your next iteration, you need to take a look at the metrics that you have from the previous iteration and say, how long does it take my team to develop software? Use those metrics, create a brand new metric, velocity metric for going forward, and you'll be able to produce much more accurate results here. Let your customers reprioritize your user stories. Your customer's in charge of what you do. Let your customer tell you what's most important to them. Whether you're using your code or somebody else's, you have to remember that it's all just software. Your processes remain the same. Okay? The processes that you go through to develop the software. You need to have at least one user story for each piece of your code. You really don't want to have any code hanging around that mysteriously showed up or can't figure out where it came from, right? When you're reusing code, never make any assumptions about it. Just because somebody tells you that it does something doesn't necessarily mean that it does it, or doesn't do something bad while it's doing it. So you need to test it, you need to see it, you need to take a careful look at it. Trust nobody else's code until you see it work, and of course, all of your code needs to be readable, reliable, and easy to understand. And the reason for that is the job that you have right now is always, always, always a temporary job. You hope to go on to bigger and better things, which means the code that you're producing today will eventually be given to somebody else. And when they get your code, you want them to go, wow, he must have gone up on the hill and there was tablets and this code was written on the tablets and he brought the code down and this is fantastic, wonderful code. You don't want them to be bad-mouthing you after you move on going, it's not documented, it doesn't work well, it's crazy, and there's no test cases, right? So you always want to have great code because it does become your legacy. Fantastic. All right, so what did we cover today? So we talked about planning for the next iteration. And it's critical. Your planning for the next iteration determines how well that iteration is going to go. We talked about recalculating the velocity. If you want to be accurate about what you're going to be able to produce in the next iteration, you need to be able to produce accurate estimates and tell the customer what you're going to be delivering to them, and most importantly, when you're going to be able to deliver it to them. Gotcha. So dealing with changes from the customer, ultimately the customer is running the show. They get to determine, number one, what you work on, and number two, the priority in which you work on it. So you always have to be having this ongoing dialogue with the customer saying, what do you want and when do you want to have it? Okay? And finally, we talked about using other people's code. You will always be given code from other people. You will always be dropped onto other projects. You will inherit code in a bunch of different ways. When that happens, you must not trust their code. You have to assume that their code doesn't work until you're proven otherwise. Fantastic. All right. So if that's what we covered today, we've got one to cover. Next time we're going to cover bugs. The scourge of software development everywhere. Or as we say in Python, do a little red code that shows up. Error. Fantastic. What else we got to talk about? Hey, on Python, it turns out there's more to talk about on files. And so we should probably get together and talk about files. Let's do it in 15 minutes. Let's come back in 10 minutes until